live. We are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter. I think that's it. So broadcast straight to those channels. Anybody who's watching, in particular on LinkedIn, if you want to ask any questions as we go through, feel free to comment. I say this every week and I forget what you have to do, but I think you have to double hit enter. I don't think there's actually a button to comment on a live on LinkedIn. So you type your comment, hit enter twice, but I'm sure people will figure it out. Before I introduce Wayne or give Wayne an opportunity to introduce himself, just going to go through the usual. Don't forget to subscribe. So we are on YouTube. So for those of you watching, don't forget to subscribe. And I'll tell you a little bit about what EdTech Live is in case you're watching for the first time. So EdTech Live, born out of a newsletter that I started pulling together on LinkedIn. It's now got just under 1,000 subscribers. And people were saying to me, look, we want a different way to digest content. And is there any way you can introduce us to leaders in the education or EdTech space? So that's what EdTech Live is. It's a chance for hopefully me to introduce you to leaders in this sector, in this space, and for you to ask questions, for us to learn, you to learn, and so on. And today it's not often I get this, Wayne, but I've managed to get somebody who I deem a leader in the EdTech sector, but also been in the education world as well as, immersed in a school. So I'll shut up there and say, do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, more than happy to do so, and delighted to be here. So my name's Wayne Cartmel. I'm founder at My New Term, which is a technology application, and we connect schools and candidates directly through our application. It was something that I developed as a teacher when I experienced what is the really archaic and repetitive process to apply for jobs in education. And as somebody that came from outside the sector, I couldn't quite believe that was the process you had to go through in order to jump through the hoops of applying for jobs in education. So it was my frustration that then led me to develop the business that we see today. First time I did it, it failed quite miserably, and then I kind of jumped back on the horse. I couldn't let it go, and now, as a few years have passed, we are what is the leading applicant tracking system in the education sector for schools and multi-academy trusts in England. So it's been quite a journey to get where we are, and there's lots more still to be done.
There's always more to be done, isn't there? It's challenging every single day as a founder, I think. So the eagle-eyed viewers amongst us, and there are people watching, I can see that, who tune in and watch this every week, will have noticed that I haven't done my usual "how did we meet?" And that is deliberate. And it's deliberate because my next question is about not how we met, because we've not met physically, have we? Today is like the first day we've actually spoke other than exchanging messages. But I'd read a post that Wayne had put on LinkedIn. I'll share it on the screen. I'm not going to read through it, but it was about, it was a really honest appraisal of Wayne's experience as a founder and transitioning from a school to being the founder of a business and how that impacts on your life, etc., etc. If you want to read it in full, comment and I'll send it to you. I'll tag you in the actual comment, or if you go to Wayne's profile, you'll be able to scroll through and see it. So I'll take it off screen now. But it really resonated with me because obviously I've been a founder myself, and I've been through some of those challenges. So the question I was going to ask about this, and I'm not going to read it verbatim. I'm just going to say it was a really honest and open post about your experiences as a founder. First off, what inspired you to post it?
What inspired me? I don't know why it came to mind. I often kind of come up with just ideas of content to post, and I think people can really resonate with experiences. And obviously, you've been a founder as an example. It's just really hard, and that was just a personal reflection of part of the journey that I've been on, and really just outlining, I suppose, the bits that potentially people wouldn't know. They might see obviously the business and the brand and things, but they don't necessarily know what it's taken to get it to where it is. And obviously a lot of businesses fall by the wayside, and you don't necessarily get to hear the story. So it was just a personal account and a personal reflection, and I find it really easy to write when it comes so naturally, because it's just the story that I'm telling.
I think they're the best posts myself. I like those posts that you've not planned and you can just bang on the keyboard. Very rarely do I sense check myself as well. Sometimes I need people to sense check me. I've done a couple of these where I get the better of myself and something excites me and I drop a swear word or whatever. But I like the idea of just being really open, pure, and honest in what you've done. Anything in the journey that really jumps out as something that other people might want to hear about, or?
I mean, there is so much that I could kind of touch on. I think if you've been a founder or you are a founder, you'll kind of like understand some of the challenges, but also some of the rewards that come, when you do start your own business and your own thing. But for those that haven't, it's such a rewarding thing to do. I get immense satisfaction and reward from obviously the work that I do and the work that I put in, and I work far harder than I ever did when I was employed.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, the challenges are very real and often particularly difficult, but it is a really rewarding thing to do, and I don't foresee myself kind of making a change back anytime soon. So there's lots of specifics that I could kind of point to, and there's real highs and there's real lows in there. But I love the journey, and that's the bit that I like the most.
Yeah, you mentioned working a lot harder, and I do that definitely without a doubt. So since I started working, and it's not because I slacked before either. I've always worked hard, but being a founder, the days and the nights merge into one. Everything like blends together, and people have often said to me about they mentioned the term work-life balance, and I always say to them, the key word in that is balance. What's balance to me might be different for you, and I don't feel like I ever neglect my family. I don't know if you've got family, Wayne, and children, but I've got 2 girls, and people ask me if they miss out, and I'm like, no, because I'm 100% immersed in my work, but when it's their time, I'm 100% immersed in them, and there might be an imbalance between the amount of time I spend. And when I look back, I think that's impacted on them positively rather than negatively as well. So so much of what you're saying resonates, but in particular that bit about hard work, it's so difficult, but the enjoyment bit overrides that sometimes, I think.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's there's people, and I've done presentations at let's say university events of people that are potentially looking at starting their own business, and people say that they want to start their own business to get flexibility and work-life balance, and that is the complete opposite end as to why you should start a business, because it's really hard. And if you think that you're going to get a greater balance by having starting a business, I'm afraid that you're not, especially at the early parts of that. You've really got to put in a lot of work and a lot of effort to make it work, and it's why so many fail, because of the nature of it.
Do you think the key is doing something you love, or something that you're really invested in and believe in?
Yeah, absolutely. Something that you're passionate about. If you haven't got a passion for it, then I wouldn't have that same level of motivation that I do day in, day out. So yeah, without question. And I think if you lean in on whatever your passions are, and if you are looking to go down that route of starting your own business, just lean in on your passion. And that could be sports, that could be music, whatever that might be that you're really passionate about, and find yourself a niche. And you'd be amazed at the opportunities that can come up as a result. And I wasn't actively searching for this to do, but I always knew that I would start my own business at some point, and then the opportunity arose, and I just leaned into it, and that's exactly how it came about, really.
Something else that comes up, and I've not mentioned this to you before, so apologies. We've obviously had a chat about some of the questions. How old were you when you founded My New Term?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to say that I would have been 25, I think.
Wow.
Yeah, 25.
I'm trying to think how. I think I must have been When I founded Maze, the first business that I founded, I think I must have been 30. No, maybe a little bit older, because I'd worked in a council for a long period of time, and everyone thought I was mad. And I was like, and people now say to me, is there an age limit? Is there a cut off? And I always said, no, you're never too old to jump, and you're never too young either. If you really believe in something. So I just wondered, it swung into my mind, at what age was it? Because I genuinely believe that anybody can do it as long as they've assessed right.
Yeah, and if you look at some of the most successful founders, they, that there are a real variety of ages. So no, age is no barrier at all.
So there's a danger we could talk about that all day. So I'm going to move on. And in the post, you mentioned looking back and looking at what you've achieved. When you do that, because I know I do it regularly, I like to look back at what we've achieved. Is there an overriding emotion for you when you do so?
Yeah, a feeling of pride, really. I did this because I wanted to improve the experience of that teacher in terms of where I was, that candidate, that experience that I had. I wanted myself and others to have a much better experience, as opposed to just wasting time filling in application form after application form.
Yeah.
And, in the past month, for example, alone, we've had over 20,000 people apply directly to schools through technology. And, all of those people then, and I see the reviews that come in and the comments that we obviously get, and people really compliment us on that positive candidate experience, whether that be from the text message alerts and the good luck messages, or, the ease of application, the communication with employers. And it's all of those things that I didn't have, and that poor experience. And that's the real sense of that we're really helping people, whether they're cleaners, TAs, class teachers, head teachers, CEOs, the full range of vacancies, but we're helping people, move on into, other careers and progress, and ultimately then the impact that has on the children, within classrooms.
I absolutely love that, because I've been through application processes before when I'm looking at a job, and been put off applying for stuff that I know I should really apply for, because I just don't want to do it again, and I don't want to go do it. Keep repeating myself, and you're really impacting at both ends, aren't you? So impacting in schools, mats, education establishments, and impacting for the applicant as well, which is great. I sometimes look back and think, God, I must have been mad. And then I've gone and done it again. And I'll probably do it again after this. I mentioned, and I think you mentioned, I've been a founder as well.
Yep.
I personally struggled to make the jump. And to give some context to that, so rather than just ask the question, I'd been in a role for, I bet 20 odd years. I'd been working for an organization for 20 odd years. Obviously, I've been in various roles within that organization. And every year that passed, it got harder and harder to make the jump. And I knew I wanted to do it. I'd known from a really young age, I wanted to work for myself. I was that kid who won a lottery at school and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But I found it hard to make the jump, because I was leaving security behind, because I knew I'd got a decent pension and all the trappings of everyday life. Was that the same for you? What was it like for you? And then I guess I'd tag on to the end of that. Any advice you'd give to people who are stuck in the same place I was, if it wasn't the same for you?
Yeah. Ironically, it happened really naturally and organically, that transition. Right. Now, I grew up on a farm, and for those that have obviously had maybe similar experiences, it has given me the work ethic that I have today. Because when you are a farmer, there is no kind of beginning and end to the day. It's just, that is life in terms of what that looks like. And I remember, running home from school just so that I could start, and I'd still be doing it late into the evening. I'd do it every weekend. I absolutely loved it. And that's partly, obviously, again, comes to kind of like the work that I put in today. But when I was at university and I did a business with finance degree, I always knew that entrepreneurship was the route that I wanted to go down at some point, but I just didn't have the idea. I didn't obviously have the experience, and I didn't know what it was that I wanted to do, but I knew that that was going to be a pathway for me at some point. And there was parts of that university journey where I tried to force it, and I tried to just think of ideas and think of things that I could do, and it just didn't quite happen. So obviously I went into paid employment on a graduate scheme, and then subsequently into teaching. And then it's just the irony that when I came across this problem, that I experienced, that was when I was like, what can we do with this? Because this can definitely be improved. We can definitely make this process better. And it was at that point that it kind of happened. But I still remained in employment for several years while developing it in the background. It wasn't just okay, I've got an idea, let me leave employment and let me go and start this thing. It was a very gradual transition of still, working the 9 to 5, if you want to call it. And then obviously just any opportunities of evenings and weekends working on this as a side project, because when you are starting and in our case with the technology, you don't know if it's going to work, and typically it doesn't work from day one. In our case, it took a long time. We were building a marketplace effectively where we needed schools and candidates, so it was a complex problem that therefore would have been very reckless to have just left employment at that particular point. So that was the transition and how that worked for me. And I think I'd say to people just, again, when that passion arises or what it is that you're looking to do, for me, it happened really naturally, and it may be the same for you.
Yeah, I think when you know, you know. And I smiled when you said, you mentioned you were from a farming background, because my family are from a farming background, and obviously we've not spoke about this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
My granddad run a farm in a really lovely little village. My cousins still farm. They sold their previous farm for a significant amount of money, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be significant to other people. I went and bought another farm and loads of combine harvesters and stuff. And I'm like, why don't you just retire? I mean, sometimes that's in your blood as well, isn't it? That is an hard one to escape.
Absolutely.
Young Farmers Association is wild as well. Usually. I think the key word you mentioned from my experience is problem. So you've got to have a passion, but if there's no problem, you might have a great idea, but people might not buy it.
Yeah.
And if you need both of those things. You need to have a great idea, and people need to be willing to pay for it. And they tend not to do that unless you're solving a problem for them.
That's it.
So
it's the number one reason that businesses fail, because they're not solving a problem.
Yeah.
Without question. People think it's down to cash flow or other things. It's just that they haven't identified the problem, and they haven't gone and done that research to really identify, is this a problem? And ironically, I did do that before I even set out, and I did research with my peers of trainee teachers, and I did research with schools to identify, is there a problem there? And I've still got that data today, and I've just ensured that before we even set out, that we knew that there was a problem for us to solve in the first place. Yeah.
The other bit of advice from my end, I think, would be to commit to what you're trying to do, and that commitment can look different. So over time I'd tried starting a business that was IT support while I was working. I tried when the Millennium Bug came out. I think I mentioned this on a previous podcast. I was trying to fix the Millennium Bug for everybody on the estate and the village, and then so on. And then I started a business called Education Data Services while I was working. And when I first started looking back, I thought they failed because they weren't great ideas. Millennium Bug aside, it failed because it got a time limit on it. But the education data one, I think there was definitely mileage in it, and the IT support, I think there was mileage in it. I just didn't fully commit to the idea for a number of reasons. And I didn't work the weekends, and I didn't work the evenings. It was kind of like when I've got 5 minutes, when I've got this, when I've got that. So I think if it's something you really want to do and you love it and it solves the problem, you've then got to commit as well in some way, shape or form. And when I look back, I'm not sure I did that fully until May. So sorry, something just popped up on my screen over the next questions. So the next thing is really, there's a big difference between our experiences, like one big difference, and that's that you've been a teacher. Do you think it gave you an advantage when you transitioned to EdTech or to the finding or being a founder in this space?
Yeah, absolutely, it did, because I understand the challenges and I understand what it's like on the inside. And until you've been a teacher in this particular example, you can't really explain to somebody else that hasn't experienced that in terms of what that is like day to day and what that looks like. So again, it was my personal experience that then ultimately was the rationale for going and creating the business. And it's that I've just fixated on throughout the entirety of the journey. And had I not had that experience, I just wouldn't understand it. And I wouldn't understand some of the context regarding it and some of the challenges in particular that schools have, and different schools have very different challenges. So yeah, absolutely, that journey of training and obviously going through that process, and then likewise obviously in teaching. Education's a very unique sector in its own right, and understanding how schools operate is really important in order to be successful in the sector.
I always say to Dave and Tom, the best compliment that we can get if we're talking to schools about our products is when or product services is when they say to us, "How long do you teach for?" Because I know that I'm trusted. Do you think it helps with, or do you think it helped with how quickly you could go to market? And just to give a bit more context to that question, so we always talk to teachers and educators about anything we're doing.
Yeah.
Do you think it saved you some of that? I know you will have still gone and spoken to teachers, etc., but you'll have known yourself, I think, unless I'm assuming. And we don't always know. We have to add a step in where we go and speak to people in the sector. So you think it speeds it up?
So I don't think it's sped up any of what I'd call maybe the product development or the technology in our particular case. And as a bootstrap business, and when I was still working full time, as an example, it was incredibly slow. And that was just the way that it was, because it couldn't be any other way unless I was going to try and raise some funding somewhere, which we didn't. But the advantage that it gave us is that market research that I did to identify in the very first place, long before we've started developing a single line of code, that, and by being on the inside, if you want to call it, you can have conversations with relevant stakeholders to identify that is what you're thinking a broader thing, or is it just what you're thinking? Is it a problem, basically? And I had to do that with two different types of stakeholder groups. Candidates who obviously potentially would be job seekers in this particular example, and then obviously schools who advertise and recruit, and that process that they go through each time that they are looking for a potential applicant. So there was two different sides in my particular case that I needed to identify and then ultimately match together through the marketplace.
Yeah, I hadn't thought that. A bit more complex into it than so I'm usually talking to one. In your post, you mentioned or you shared that 92% of SaaS businesses fail within 3 years. What lessons would you share with anyone who's looking to start up in the EdTech space to avoid falling into that 92%?
To understand really just how difficult it is. And that for me says it all. That if you're going to start a SaaS, which for those that don't know is a subscription as a service business, then the chances of you making it successful is very slim, really, when you look at those stats. So the biggest thing that you've got to do is you've got to persevere. But in order to persevere, you've got to make sure that you're solving a problem, which we've touched on a little bit already. And if you're not solving a problem, you can persevere as much as you want, but you're just flogging a dead horse. But it's that persevering to ensure that you can cross that threshold and that you can get this thing off the ground is what will ultimately prove it to be successful. But if nothing else, hopefully it just people can kind of look at that stats and and understand that SaaS, as an example, is just really hard. Developing tech businesses is really hard, and people sometimes can have the perception that it's a really easy thing to go and do, and it's far from it.
I had somebody in a school reach out to me recently, and they were like, "I've got an idea. I think it's great. It's going to solve loads of problems. Can we talk about how we get it to market?" And I was like, "Yeah, here's a link to my diary. book in, we'll have a chat. And about 4 hours later, I got a message back saying, actually, there's loads of people doing it. I've just had a look. So I think sometimes, like you say, people jump in because they see an immediate problem in front of them, and then they've not really gone out and assessed the rest of the market.
Yeah.
I don't know what I... Sorry, go on.
I'm just going to say, for those that don't know as well, selling to schools is really hard.
Yeah.
It's a really competitive market. There's a lot of EdTech businesses out there. There's a lot of businesses that ultimately want to sell into schools, and it's a really noisy environment. So obviously this again is a personal experience, but when I first started, I contacted the 10 most local schools, and I wrote them personal letters, and I even hand wrote the envelope as an example. Out of those 10, how many replies do you think I got? And this was not paid or anything. It was just obviously to trial the service. How many replies do you think came back?
It's going to be 10 or 0, so I'm going to go 0.
Yeah, you're right. It's 0. Yeah. So it was none, and that just highlights that it's a difficult market.
It's always been a difficult market. I think it's even more difficult now because of different factors, in particular budgets. But I also think I'm from a sales background traditionally or originally, and I think we've kind of broken them a little bit as well with some poor practice, bad. And I know I'm generalising, but blanket emailing. Yeah. I've got some stick for saying this last week, but I think it's been easier in the past for us to get to schools using more traditional sales tactics. But what we've done is switch them onto those traditional sales tactics and scared them away. Gatekeepers are better than ever. You can't just ring up a school. If you're working like pharmaceuticals, you can find somebody, ring them up, and you're talking to somebody who might have an interest in your product. And if you research properly, you don't get that in schools because you've got to get through the gatekeeper unless you take a slightly left field approach, and even then it's difficult. So I think we've broken the model a little bit ourselves as well. Actually, I think some responsibility for that. A question jumps into my head. That's another one that's slightly left field. I'm going to turn this one off. And I haven't got this one set up to scroll because it's just popped into my head. Did you ever come close to quitting?
A really good question. And if for those who've obviously read the post or maybe seen some of the journey, you would think you must have done. Genuinely, no, I never did, because I never thought that it wouldn't work. And I got myself in really deep. And I look back now and I realize that and I see that, but I never thought I was at the time, because I was just absolutely adamant that this thing was going to work, because I knew the problem that we were solving was going to work. So no, I never did, which is strange to say really, but no, people have asked me that over the years, and no, it never did cross my mind that of quitting.
You would think, having read the post, there might have been times like you say, but I also think the flip side to that is you'd experienced all the negatives that you were trying to solve, aren't you, time and time again. So personally and firsthand that it's going to work as well. So I usually wrap up, Wayne, with a couple of quick fire questions. So the first one is, what one thing, and it can be anything, it can be my new term. What one thing have you seen in schools that's made you go, wow, that's really making a difference?
There's so much that I could pick, to be quite honest. I think there's some really interesting things happening with AI at the moment, and I think in some respects, some of it's a bit of it in its infancy, but I'm really excited about the potential of some of the things that I've kind of seen in that space. But I'll pick a simpler one really, and almost going back to my experience of when I was teaching to where we are now, of just general social media and the way that a lot of schools and multi-academy trusts now use social media. I remember when social media, circa maybe 10 years ago, a lot of schools were really nervous about using it, and it was a big worry regarding that. But it can be used really positively to showcase the brand of a school, of the organization. And I think when used really well, it's a fantastic asset for schools, and that's obviously about attracting pupils and parents, and obviously the wider community within there, and just relevant stakeholders. So, I see some schools use it incredibly well, and I think it's a really underutilized resource that schools utilize.
It's funny that I'm working with a couple of schools in a trust at the moment to coach some people in the school around using socials to raise profile. I think you guys do that really well at my new term as well. So obviously, I know some people who work with you, and I like the balance you've got between building personal brand and the company brand as well. I think it leans on each other really nicely. So if anyone is watching, you can take a look and you'll see what Wayne's on about. And then the second one is, what one book or podcast would you recommend to everyone listening and why? And I always say one. Most people choose like 15, so it's up to you.
Again, I'm going to find it really difficult to narrow down just to one. So I listen to more podcasts than I do books, ironically. Podcasts, I mean, the obvious one to obviously say is Stephen Bartlett and the Diary of a CEO.
Yeah.
I listen to an awful lot of those. I think he gets some fantastic guests on, and there's some just a real variety of obviously experiences that people obviously share. But the other one that I'll touch on that people might not be aware of is it was called the Good Luck Club, but it's by a guy called Simon Squibb. And it was my podcast, my lockdown podcast, should I say. Yeah. And I listened to many of those, and he speaks to founders of businesses, across the world. And I picked up some really fascinating insights from that podcast. And he's now got called Help Bank. But again, if you are looking to start your own business, Simon Squibb, who's really big on social media, is definitely worth a follow. And in terms of a book, the one book from a business perspective that I'd recommend is The Lean Startup. I've bootstrapped a business, and we've done that by being incredibly lean. And my university dissertation was was regarding lean methodology. So I'm a big advocate for lean principles, and I think there's an awful lot of learning from that if you are obviously looking to start a business. So that would be my recommendations.
I mean, so this is so scary. I'm smiling again, right? So there's the pharma connection. I'm a Lean Six Sigma black belt.
Right. Okay.
So anyone looking, that does not like Kung Fu. Anyone watching, sorry, it's not Kung Fu or anything like that. But yeah, my dad was a Lean Six Sigma black belt. I followed in his footsteps. He's probably better than I am. Okay. But yeah, it's a similar interest there as well. Yeah. Before I just wrap up, Wayne mentioned the EdTech sector. I can't remember which question it was I asked, and how. I don't know if you use the term noisy. You might have used a different term, but how noisy it can be. There's a lot of competition. There's loads of people in the sector. But I also think if you're watching this, it's a great sector to work in as well. It's quite a close-knit sector, and there's loads of support within the sector as well. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, how do I start this business? How do I start that? Have a look around at founders on socials. I've always found that everyone I reach out to is willing to help, support, chat, let me lean on their experience. So it's a great sector for that as well. So if you are watching, you're thinking, how do I go about this? Just reach out to people. And then the last one from me, Wayne, is you're obviously doing some really cool stuff. I'll have some schools watching this. I'll have some EdTech providers, everyone else. Where can people find you if they're interested in what we talked about today or in my new term?
Yep. So in terms of me personally, LinkedIn's probably the best approach. If we're not connected, just send me a request and we can obviously message. And then from my new term, it's mynewterm.com. So if you're looking for a job in education, there are thousands of schools up and down the country actively recruiting for a variety of different roles. So you can search, register, and apply directly through the technology at my new term if that was something that was of interest.
Amazing. So all that's left for me to do is remind you all to like, share, subscribe, repost, all the teenage stuff. It's the best way to support what we're trying to do with Ed and Tech Live, Ed and Tech TV, and all that sort of stuff. And other than that, it's thanks everyone for watching. Thanks Wayne for joining. I found it really useful and interesting. I'm sure everyone else has. So it's thanks from me and thanks from Wayne. It's been great.